What's going on, everybody? In today's video, we're going to continue on with our mini course series, and we are going to learn and construct a hybrid underwriting. We are going to look at a prospect deal and underwrite this according to a hybrid scenario. So let's get started. I'm going to pull up the property address right here. This is the property of interest. Property is in great condition. And we're going to move on over to PropStream, and you're going to find out why this is going to be considered a hybrid acquisition type. The reason why it's going to be a hybrid acquisition is because we have an estimated loan balance of about $343, and it is currently listed at $400,000. So if we were to do some quick math right now at 10% down to the seller would receive $40,000 up front, but they would still have some remaining equity left over because you are not paying everything up front in terms of their equity that's owed at closing. And so with a hybrid deal, you usually will have two notes involved. The first note being with the existing lender, and the second note involved with the seller themselves for any equity and any type of interest applied to that equity. So let's head on over to the Zillow. Let's verify like we did before with the true market value of the property. And we're going to paste that into Redfin. Now, Redfin actually came back up prior, and it had reported back that the true market value was at $396,000. And according to Zillow is reporting $395,000. Now, granted, Zillow and Redfin are running about 60 days behind the market cycle, the real world market cycle. So being that they're about 60 days behind, this property is probably not worth $295 right now. It might be closer to maybe $280 or $285. It's listed right now for 108 days on market. And if it truly was worth that value with today's interest rates, then this property would have been sold by now, because this property is in great condition. And there's honestly nothing wrong with this property at all. So considering that Zillow and Redfin are saying $395, I could be pessimistic and say that it's closer to $380, $385. But let's give them the benefit of the doubt, and let's say that it's $390 simply because of the condition of the property. So we're going to plug into our calculator that the current market value is going to be $390 on the property. And the encumbrance is $343 on the estimated loan balance. Add the additional payment to here to get an estimated loan payoff, and we're looking closer to $345 as a loan payoff. There are no liens, HOA, or tax liens associated with the property, so that was a good thing. Let's go back into Zillow. Zillow is going to give us an estimate on the rental value in that neighborhood. Looks like we're sitting at about $2,445 a month on the rental value. I am going to reduce that to $2,400 for simply pre-underwriting. We want to know if we can actually cash flow off of this property or not. Although $2,400 on rent seems really low considering the square footage and the number of beds and baths on here. So I'd say $2,400 is probably not going to be an accurate rental value on here. I think it's going to be probably closer to $2,600. But let's be pessimistic, and let's say it's $2,400 with the higher range of the rent being closer to $3,000. So we're going to go into our calculator. We're going to put in $2,400. Note that this is just for pre-underwriting. During the due diligence period, preferably before the due diligence period, once you have a yes from the seller or from the agent that they want to consider your creative terms, is when you should go through a full underwriting phase. But for the sake of not wasting time up front, we want to know if the pre-underwriting is going to work in our favor, where we can then dive into a more deeper analysis on the property with a full underwriting. So now that we know the rental value, we have the encumbrance, we have the market value of the property, we can start filling out the rest of this information with a 3% standard commission going towards the listing agent. We are going to apply a cash offer at 85% just to start off with. We'll put a sales fee of about 4%. There won't be any taxes associated for the cash or conventional offer. For the creative side, we're going to adjust this to 3.7. For the down payment, we're going to put in $40,000. And you can see immediately that we've got a seller carryback of $5,000. So that seller carryback is coming off of the higher purchase price minus the down payment, minus the encumbrance. If we were to move this over, well, actually, they were both the same term. So their current market equity right now is about $5,000. Now, I want to incentivize the seller to take our creative offer over the cash or conventional offer. So what I'm going to do first is not insult the seller or the agent. I'm going to come up on that cash offer price. So I'm sitting between $15,000 and $20,000 for the seller to bring to closing. So we could probably give them $345,000 at most in cash. I am doing this on the intention that I want them to reconsider a creative offer at full price. If you have a private investor, if you are a private investor, or you work with a hedge fund, then you can absolutely put in whatever cash offer you want. In our case, we're going to simply use this as a means of getting the seller to consider option number 2. Now, being that they have a current market value of $390, I am going to incentivize them with 5% over the current market value, which means I can give them $410 for the property, which is going to be $10,000 over their listing price. So I'm going to apply $20,000 over the asking price. And now the seller carryback is including the amount that we are going to pay over the current market value, plus the remainder $5,000 that was left over. Now, the reason why I'm choosing 5% cap limit is because when we have 2 notes in place, it is not ideal to go past the 5% limit. If this was just a seller finance deal, I can go up to 10% as my cap limit, but with a hybrid scenario, it's highly advised to stick at 5% or less over market value. So I can pay over market value, but I can't go over 5%. The reason being is that home appreciations typically are 5% year over year. And when you have a second note in place, it complicates things when you're trying to refinance the property if it's not done the right way. Now let's look over the tax rate for here. Tax rate on this one is going to be capital gains deferred. There will be capital gains deferred. But for the sake of showing to the seller the difference of net profit, I'm going to keep it at 0% for the time being. When you're having a conversation with the listing agent or the seller, you can tell them that their capital gains will be deferred depending on the balloon terms that you have agreed upon with the seller. Let's look at the estimated deal projection over here on the right-hand side. According to the stress test, we are going to cash flow on this property even at $2,400 a month. Anything over $200 is consideration for advancing the pre-underwriting to a full underwriting, which would be down below. So let's move on over to the variables here. We're going to estimate what the loan PITI is for this property. So we need to estimate this to the best of our ability because we are then now going to include the PITI of the first position lien, which is the loan, and then there will be a monthly payment to the seller. The best way to calculate the PITI is the first. Let's grab the principal and interest off of prop stream. We're looking at about $1,520 on the principal and interest. So we can grab $1,520. Let's plug that into our calculator. Let's move on over to Zillow. And Zillow has an option here for the cost calculator. We can then move our regular calculator over onto the screen. We will include the monthly property taxes and the monthly home insurance. This will give us an indication of the estimated PITI. So it's simply an estimate. So let's add $300 to the 1520 plus another 150. And so realistically speaking, we're going to be anywhere between $1,970 and maybe $2,100 for the total PITI on this property, especially since it's sitting at about a 3% interest rate according to PropStream itself. So I am going to take this 1970 and I am going to round that up to $2,000 a month as the total PITI for the simple purposes of estimating. Once you have an agreement from the seller or the agent has actually accepted your creative deal, you'll need to get the most recent mortgage statement and update the loan PITI. But for the sake of doing some sort of pre-underwriting and getting your LOI sent out to the seller as soon as possible, having this is a good estimate, and before or during your due diligence period is when you can adjust your final underwriting terms. So with that being said, I don't think the property had any HOA on there. I believe that was left out blank. For the balloon term in years, you want to be looking at anywhere between 3 and 5 years for that balloon term. Reason being, even though the seller carryback is not a lot, because there is a second note attached to the property, it is reducing the equity of the property. And when there is reduced equity on the property, it's going to make it difficult to refinance it later on. We will have to allow time to go on by for this property to appreciate by, in this case, $25,000. So if we're taking the example that the property is going to appreciate 5% year over year, that could take as little as 2 years, or it could take far greater than 2 years. So 3 to 5 years is the typical range for the balloon term. Now, in terms of the loan amount itself that's going to the seller, this is where we need to be creative with our loan payment structure to the seller. We are going to apply the same principle that we did up on top with our reverse seller finance, and we're going to manipulate the loan amount in the same sense as a reverse seller finance. And we want to do a reverse seller finance even on this portion here that the seller is going to receive, because we want to control how much money is the seller going to receive on the back end. If we simply go based off of the seller carryback of $25,000 and we apply 1% interest, we are going to overpay for the property itself, because we have already included the $20,000 as part of our calculations, and we have agreed to pay the seller $20,000 over the current market value. If the seller comes back to you and says, I want 5% interest rate, well, now you're paying them $31,000 for equity, where you have originally agreed to pay them $25,000 over current market value plus, $20,000 over market value plus the $5,000 that they originally had, right? So we're going from 25 to 31, and that's just not going to work for us. So in order to fix this, we need to do a reverse seller finance. So we're going to take a very similar concept on what we did up here, and we're going to apply it to our hybrid. The original loan amount that we've agreed to is $25,000, but it's not really the loan amount. This is the total profit being received by the seller. And so I want you to think of it in terms of that sense. The $25,000 is total profit to the seller, not the loan amount. We need the ability as the buyer to make sure that we're not going to overpay in the long run when the payments are amortized. And so in order to do this, we're going to build in the interest into this variable here, the $25,000. And so in order to build in the interest, what we could do is take the $25,000, and let's start off with $20,000. And we're going to intentionally do this, knowing that we're going to have a loan amount of $20,000 and we're going to apply interest to the $20,000 so that the interest received by the seller is $5,000, which will then give us a total profit of $25K to the seller. If we do it in this manner, not only are we going to get the interest deductions, not only is the seller going to see an amortized interest rate on their payment structure, but we can also control the total payout being received by the seller. And that is the goal here. We need that ability. Otherwise, we're going to end up paying $40,000 for this property's seller carryback portion when we've already agreed to a carryback of $25,000. There's no reason to double pay on here, right? So let's apply the amortized interest rate to the point where the total pay to the seller is going to equal the $25,000. So at 1% annualized interest rate, we're looking at almost $21,000, so an additional $1,000 in their pocket. So let's take that concept and maybe change this to 5%. And so now we're really close to getting that seller carryback to where we want it to be. Let's take this to maybe 5.15, and we're not even close, actually. We have to get this up to $5,000, and I think I went down on the interest rate. I meant to put in 5.15. There we go. So 5.15% gets us really close. Let's try 5.25. 5.25. Okay. And according to our math check, we're good as well. Let's try and bring that down ever so slightly to 5.23. We might be able to do a little bit better than that. 5.21. Okay, maybe we could do better than that. What I'm trying to do here, even though we're talking about single digits here, is get this as close as possible to the $25,000 being received by the seller. Okay, that looks like it's going to be the best that we could do. So with this in mind, if we take a screenshot of this for explanation purposes, if we have a loan amount for $20,000, we can amortize the loan amount of 5.2%, which will get a total paid to the seller of $25,000. So this is what we're trying to target. The seller is going to receive $86 or so. It's going to get paid down eventually, but they're starting off with $86 of interest being applied with a principal of $23. Their loan payment's going to be $109 on that seller carryback for the next 60 months, with a total due at the balloon at the end of 60 months for $18,000. Now, are they going to accept a monthly payment of $109? I have no idea. It's possible. You never know. They might actually accept $100. But what we could do is maybe even include that to today's interest rates at 7%. Now, if we did that to 7%, we're technically going to be paying over the seller carryback. So we actually can't do that. So let's go back down to 5.15. Let's go to 5.2. Okay, so 5.2, maybe 5.5. Let's try 5.5. Let's see how far we can get in terms of bringing that amortized interest rate up. We could probably get closer to 6% now that I'm thinking about it, but that might not even be something that we have to technically look at right now. Let's leave it at 5.2%. The reason why I want to leave it at 5.2% is I want this total pay to the seller be as close as possible to the seller carryback. That should be your main goal. Get the amount to receive by the seller to be as close as possible to the agreed upon seller carryback. So an amortized interest of 5.2% is going to get us that amount. So if we take back our screenshot, leave it up here on the screen, if we were to, I guess it's not going to stay on the screen, if we were to change this back to $25,000, which is the seller carryback, now we can see that we're actually paying $31,000 for the property as opposed to 25 like we had originally wanted. So the whole point of doing a reverse seller finance is to control the total paid being received by the seller. Same interest rate, but more money in the seller's pocket. But I have already agreed to pay the seller $20,000 over ask. So with that being said, there's no reason to pay even more. So we are going to embed the interest into the principal loan amount. So I'm going to go back to our original numbers here. And this would be a way to do a reverse seller finance, but on a hybrid breakdown. So our numbers right now, they're not going to be the best. Are we able to cash flow on this property? Yes, we can actually cash flow on the property. According to our stress test, we had agreed that anything over $200 is going to allow us to move over from pre-underwriting to a full underwriting. And we can see here that we do cash flow. Now, mind you, this cash flow sees that there is no management fees and repair reserves being applied. If we apply the management fee and repair reserves, now we're in the negative territory. So when you are working on a hybrid deal, you'll need to be mindful of what your exit strategy is. Most hybrid deals are not going to function well through a traditional LTR. Through a midterm rental, through a lease option, through a wrap agreement, those types of exit strategies will work quite well. Now, the math is pretty much done here. So what we're going to do is we're going to head on over to the master tab. We're going to do the exact same thing that we did on our previous properties. We're going to pull this agent's information, and let's see, listing provided by Martha. So we'll copy Martha's info. I don't see a telephone number or an email on here, but we can simply, for the sake of example, we can simply apply it. So the deal type is going to be hybrid. We'll put in Martha123@gmail.com. Let's give Martha a telephone number. And the property address is 5036 Luxford Drive. And so our master input tabs are finalized. If you want to CC somebody or BC someone, you absolutely can. Maybe in this example, I will. I'll include Bill as the CC on this email. Let's move on over to our hybrid tab here at the bottom. And depending on what your strategy is for the LOI, you can manipulate and edit the LOI however you choose. But with the current template that is provided, you will see the cash and the creative portion already pulling that information from the master tab. We've got a breakdown of our first option and option number 2 with an explanation of how the hybrid scenario is going to work for the seller. Now we've got the payment structure for the seller, which is highly important, right? So the seller actually in this example is receiving quite a bit of interest, even though we've restructured the loan so that technically, though it is principal only, because this is technically a principal only payment to the seller, we've reversed it so that the seller is being perceived as receiving interest. And it's also a benefit to the buyer because now these become a tax deduction against the gross income. So let's go back to the hybrid tab. We've got the down payment to the seller, monthly payment to the seller. We've got the balloon terms, the interest collected, which was the $5,000 that we were looking for, and the total profit made by the seller, which was the $25,000. Now, note, originally, they only had $5,000 of gross equity remainder. So if we move this variable over to $390, which is the current market value, they really only have $5,000 of current market equity, but we are willing to pay the seller $20,000 over that market value. Let's move back into the hybrid tab. We've got a nice little graph here, and we can see here that they are going to visually be presented with a total gain of 25%. That is enormous, a 25% gain. So when a seller is receiving this, visually speaking, it's going to speak volume to them. We can include any other information that you want. And what we'll do now is verify that the end of our boundaries, in this case, we have it set for F157. Let's verify that this is where we want the boundary to end. F157 would put us over here. I am fine with that. This would just be the page for any recent HUDs closed, or you could use that page for anything that you want. So we'll now click Convert Text to PDF. You saw how that just auto-populated. Let's click Send Email. We've got Martha's email ready to go. We've got the property address. We've got the body paragraph. And let's open up the LOI. And the LOI has now been structured. Remember, when you're sending out these LOIs, please remove this text box. This text box over here is simply for demonstration purposes. If you don't want to remove the text box, then you can simply edit this out from the text box itself. So everything is structured now to where the seller can receive an LOI from you, and you just did the math on a hybrid deal. So this concludes our series on underwriting sub-2, seller finance, and hybrid deals. This is pretty much an all-in-one calculator. And on our next video, we're going to be discussing our exit strategies when coming to wrap and lease, as well as some extra knowledge in the event that you are working with a veteran. You'll have some extra knowledge here to calculate the VA second entitlement. So these two will be for the next discussion on our next video.